Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our new Hapara webinar series. This is the first installment where we invite experts in the field of education to share what they're passionate about. Some webinars like today's will appeal to school administrators, where others will focus on topics appealing to classroom teachers. Our January webinar will feature literary specialist Shaylin Farnsworth, who will discuss ways to maximize feedback. So stay tuned for more information coming to your inbox. Today, we're very lucky to have Stephen Anderson with us. He's a leading figure in convergence of digital learning and leadership. He's a learner, blogger, speaker, educational evangelist, author, and dad. Suffice it to say, he's got his hands full. So without further delay, Stephen, thank you for joining us and take it away.
Thanks so much for having me. So thanks everybody for taking the time out to talk a little bit about making the best technology purchasing decisions. This really plays at my roots as a technology director and instructional technology director, and a lot of the lessons that I learned along the way. I was in a district that had 86 schools and 65,000 students, which means I had 86 principal personalities and superintendent and many other different folks who all wanted a say in how technology purchasing was going to be done, but ultimately that decision resided with me. And so I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but also learned a lot along the way. And so that's what I'm hoping to share with you today. As we said, my name is Stephen Anderson. I'm a digital learning and relationship evangelist. I have lots of fancy titles, but most of all, I'm an educator and a learner and a sharer. And I enjoy the opportunity to share with educators from around the world on all things digital, technology, leadership, program implementation, efficacy. I do like to wear fancy pants. If you have seen me around or have had the pleasure of seeing me in person, you've probably seen many versions of many different fancy pants that I wear. And if I haven't, come check me out at a conference. You can find me on Twitter at Web20Classroom. If you've ever heard of the hashtag EdChat, I'm one of the co-founders of that hashtag. And so you can see all the things that I'm sharing there on Twitter. So I thought I would start the conversation today with looking at the current state of EdTech. And this isn't something that we often think about. We often live within our bubble of our district or our school, and it's easy to get caught up with what's happening just in our area, maybe in our county or in our region. But I think it's good to take a high level view, because a lot of the things we're gonna talk about come back to this current state of EdTech. And so I went and I did a lot of digging to try and find some numbers, and was able to find a few things. So if you've never heard of the National Center for Education Statistics, that's a group run out of the U.S. Department of Education that tracks a lot of this type of data. And any kind of education statistic you ever wanted to know, they probably have it there, and probably a history of it there. But according to the most recent numbers, there's approximately 55.6 million students in the U.S. That's PK-12, public, private, and parochial. If we start to break down, if we look at number of devices, the device makers are not very forthcoming with the numbers that they have exactly out there for obviously for business reasons, but there are some estimates that are out there. So there's an estimated 12 to 15 million iPads in schools. We know that there is an estimated 17 to 19 million Chromebooks in schools, and the data shows us that more than half of all classrooms have access to a Chromebook. Now, these are late 2017, early 2018 numbers. That was the latest numbers I could find. That number of Chromebooks has probably crept up since then, closer to 21 to 22 million, putting it in the 55 to 56% range of classrooms. More often than not, if a student is working on a device, it's going to be a Chromebook. Microsoft is very tight-lipped about their numbers, but odds are a Microsoft Windows device makes up the other chunk of that of the classroom connectivity, and at least 95% of classrooms have at least one internet connected device. So and again, that's from late 2018. So again, that number has probably crept up since that time. And the one startling statistic, I think, is that in the United States alone, the edtech industry is worth $9.5 billion, billion with a B. Globally, it's worth 22 billion. There's a lot of money in EMEA and in APAC, which is Asia Pacific. But in the US, 9.5 billion is a lot of money in edtech. A lot of that is devices. Obviously, that's the most expensive cost. A lot of that is infrastructure and backbone, but the majority of that is obviously software and licensing. But that's a lot of money that's spent, with a lot of questions still remaining as to the impact that EdTech has on learning. That's not to say that EdTech can't have a positive impact on learning, but when we're purchasing devices for just purchasing sake, then we're missing the point. So we need to think more keenly about how we make purchases, because what we're moving into is what I call technology-enabled learning environments, TELEs. These are environments that are allowing teachers and students to do things that weren't possible. I talk a lot to leadership about what I call transformational use of technology, where actually students have the opportunity to create things that they wouldn't have been able to create before. We're not just simply using technology as a replacement for something that could have been done, where before students could write a term paper, now they can type a term paper in Google Docs or Microsoft Word. Well, what's the point in purchasing, laptops for one-to-one if that's all we're going to do? We have to really seriously consider the hardware and the software that we're purchasing, because these technology-enabled learning environments can have a true impact on learning. And what educators need to do, and this is teachers, leaders, curriculum directors, superintendents, school board, what these digitally savvy leaders are going to have to do in order to lead this transition is not only understand what to look for in the classroom, but ensure instructional goals are being reached, and that the job of technology is supporting, not driving instruction. Therefore, when we're thinking about purchasing, we have to think differently at this point, because in the past it's been how am I going to get the most value for my dollar? That's not to say that's not still important. It definitely is. But we need to step back and say, what is the instructional value of buying all of these 3D printers? Is it because the district next door has a bunch of them and we do too? Is it because one squeaky wheel teacher said, well, I went to a conference and they talked about 3D printers and I need 10 of them? Or is it because we are really taking a concentrated look at curriculum and instruction and have decided that making an investment in some sort of digital technology or digital license is going to help us attain that goal? And so that's at the essence of what we're going to be talking about today with making technology purchases, because purchasing can't be about the bottom line anymore. It can't just be about putting out an RFP and saying, hey, we need 1,000 devices, who can give us the best price? Obviously, that's the last step of the process. What gets us to there is a lot of reflecting and a lot of thinking and a lot of conversation before we even ever issue that RFP. Now, as I said, I was a technology director and an instructional technology director, and I was over one of the largest districts in North Carolina, and one of the top 100 largest districts in the country. And so when I came into my position, I inherited a purchasing program that really had no rhyme or reason to it. So as an example, in order to make a software purchase in my district, it was more of a whatever the principal wanted. They could go out and they could say, this is what I want, and enter into that agreement, into that contract themselves, without ever having to talk to the technology department. The only role that my program played in purchasing was buying computers and providing internet and providing a backbone for the district, outside of the instructional technology program, and that was really our role. And it was the Wild West. We were supporting legacy software that we were spending more in keeping server systems up to date and keeping hardware systems up to date than we would have been had we totally scrapped that software and purchased something that was more compatible with our system. We were spending gobs and gobs of money keeping this software running rather than really taking a look at our investment in order to make the best decision. And so what I did was I got my superintendent to agree that we could pull back anything technology related had to be approved by our program, by the technology department. If a district wanted to enter into an agreement with a vendor to purchase some software, they had to get approval and final sign off before any funds were spent from the technology department. And that was step one. Step two was really an analysis of our overall program. And this is where I was able to take a look and say, what are we supporting? What is it that we're doing today that we're having a really hard time supporting, whether it was devices or it was software? We did a deep data analysis of looking at how was systems being used. Well, we had, for one example, I had several schools on their own hardware contracts that we had to that they were spending way more than what we would be doing in the technology department as a whole. So they were throwing money away because they were being essentially taken advantage of. And again, that's not to say every vendor takes advantage of those situations, but again, we had to think differently about how we were going to do this. But we also faced an issue too, in that time and instruction were marching forward, and we needed to decide how are we going to support our students instructionally? How were we going to support our staff in order to give them devices that were going to make a lot of meaning? And so once we got our software and our backbone under control, then we were able to really look at devices. Did we want to go one-to-one? Was there another option? Did we want to go BYOD? Was our infrastructure ready for that? And so before we made any decisions, we went and we talked to students, and we gave students the choice. We bought several different types of devices, and we gave them to our students before we ever made a major purchase. We gave devices to our students. We got students at all grade levels and gave them devices to use in their class. They could use them for an entire quarter, entire 9 weeks, in every single class, and they were able to then switch them out. And so over the course of 18 months, we had our students try several different types of devices, different operating systems, different different tablets with stylus, tablets without stylus, convertible tablets, traditional laptops. It didn't really matter what the device was running. What mattered was how that student was going to be using that. And that was a decision that we came to because of the analysis that we looked at, because we said, look, we have a lot of systems that essentially talk to each other. We just have to connect them together. And so we didn't have to have these disparate systems sitting out there. We could actually make them work and talk together on our end. So it really didn't matter what operating system or OS everything was running. What mattered was the device. What device was those students going to use? So after a lot of analysis, essentially what it boiled down to is we decided one-to-one was not going to be best for our students. And actually there's good research to show that one-to-one may not be a viable option for some students, that, in order to foster environments of true collaboration, students need to have the opportunity to work together. But there's still much debate about that. But for us, it was going to be a 3-to-1 environment. So we put 15 devices in a classroom, 5 of 3 different kinds, and the students could then choose what they wanted to use that day. That worked for us, but the only reason we were able to find that out is because we took a step back. We said, look, we don't care what's happening in the districts around us. The district next door might be buying up a whole bunch of iPads or buying up a whole bunch of tablets, and that's fine. And actually what happened to us was that district next door that purchased a whole bunch of iPads ran into a whole bunch of problems because they just went out and purchased them, and didn't really do any analysis, and then figured out all the things that they wanted to do couldn't work on that device. And so they essentially had a bunch of bricks that they had purchased. So for me, it was very important for us as a team to step back and ask a lot of these questions that we're getting ready to talk about, of how do we make the best technology purchase? What specifically are we going to do in order to make the best purchases that, again, are going to drive instruction in a positive way, so that we push learning to the next level. We use technology in a transformative way, but we also protect the investment that we have, and protect in our case, the taxpayer dollar that's being spent on those devices, or on that license, or on that software. So that's at the heart of what we're going to talk about going forward, is what are the things we can do. In this case, the 8 things we can do to make the best technology purchases. And again, this isn't fully comprehensive. There's a whole lot more depth that we can do, but for the time being, I think you'll get the understanding of what we're doing here. So the first thing we do is the first thing that we would suggest, that I would suggest, is exactly what we did. You have to do an overall analysis of the overall program, and this is not something that's just done one time and we say, hey, we did it, we're done. It's a constant analysis of what's happening with the technology in the technology program. And it really can be broken down into 3 areas. It's really thinking about, first, what are we doing right now, or we're not doing, to necessitate this notion of a purchase. Is the purchase, are we talking about this because we're at the end of a life cycle and we need to update? Okay, well, that's a legitimate concern. If a device, we're at the end of a device life cycle after 3 to 5 years, we need to turn those devices in. We need to analyze, how were those devices? Was that the best device? So we got a really great deal on device X. Device Y, they're going to give us a great deal, but is device Y better? Is it the same? Is it going to give us more? Or looking at it from the flip side, is there something that we're not doing, that we're not enabling an environment where students can truly succeed? Is there some business process that we're not able to do that's holding us back, because we need to make this because we don't have this piece of hardware, we don't have this technology? Perhaps it's moving, a lot of districts are moving from traditional Microsoft Active Directory to cloud-based Azure. And so that can be an expensive move, but in the long run, the things you get with Azure can save you a lot of money, and plus a lot of systems play in the Azure playground that can really have systems talk to each other. So while there may be a larger upfront cost, maybe what's necessitating that purchase is more compatibility across disparate systems. So again, it's really taking a deep dive and looking at every aspect of the technology system, the infrastructure, the hardware, the server systems, the wiring systems, the access points, the software that's running. What is it that's happening instructionally that's going to drive this purchase? So whatever situation it is, if you're looking at, hey, the superintendent says we have to have maker spaces. Okay, well, what are we going to do with them, and how can we protect our investment and protect money in order to get the best value to create a viable makerspace for students that is instructionally sound? It's looking at it from that lens. And so that's why it's important for not only the technology director, if they don't have a background in instruction, to seek out those people like an instructional technology person, like teachers, like students, like other folks, in order to get as much information as possible to make the best decisions. And we're going to do this analysis continuously. We're going to make it a part of our overall technology planning to look at the current state of our systems once a year, and then do quarterly updates. How are things going? And we're not looking at anything at any depth in those quarterly reports. We're just looking at simple information to see if anything stands out, so that when the time comes, we're not surprised. The second area is, what data do we have to back up the necessity of purchase? one of the areas when I go in and I talk to districts and they say, hey, or my partner Shaylin, when we go in and we talk to districts about some, literacy software or some technology system, we say, well, when was the last time you ran usage reports? And they're like, what's a usage report? We don't often look at data because we have a fear of data, and actually data can tell us a lot. Used appropriately, data can tell us a whole lot, especially in this context. If you've got software that the math department said that they absolutely had to have, and you go in and you look at the usage report, and that software they fought so hard for is nobody's using it, that's a problem. And so we need to step back and we say, well, wait a minute, why are you paying for something that nobody's using? What's the problem? Is it a professional development problem? Is it a staffing problem? Is it we really didn't know the full extent of what was going to be required? Do we not have the right equipment? So that's why we're going to do this all up front. And we're going to look at those things up front rather than getting surprised at the end. But usage data can tell us a lot if they come back and they say, oh, I got to have this software. Well, you're not really using the stuff that you're using now. You're not using the devices you're using now. Another area is staff and student surveys, asking people what they think. Hey, we're like my district did with the devices. What are we doing with, asking students their opinions on those devices? What's the fear of asking students what they feel? What's the fear of asking staff? A lot of times that fear is driven out of a place of we're afraid of what the answer is going to be because we know what the answer is. We just don't want to hear it. And so being more transparent about why are we making these purchases can really lead to more buy-in in the end because people feel a part of the process. And other reports too that could be available to help back up the necessity of purchase. And then one of the areas that needs to be looked at very critically is people. There needs to be an account and a current state of the people. What are if we make this huge purchase, so if we purchase 12,000 laptops, how are we going to support that? How are we going to roll those out? Do we have the people in order to make that happen? Not even people. Do we have the space in order to do that? So keeping a current state of people is going to be important. Do we have the right people trained as technicians? Are there other pressing professional development needs that could solve some problem? If we're looking at making a purchase of a piece of software or some license because we feel like it's going to fill this gap, perhaps it's time to step back and say, what professional development have we provided of what we already have, or what is freely available that could fill the gap, and we could take those funds and apply them somewhere else. That was one thing that I required of myself as instructional technology director, was continuously looking at what professional development are we offering, how is it meeting the needs of our teachers and our support staff, and what is it that we could be doing that could fill a gap. And so maybe a purchase doesn't need to be made because the usage data is telling us that nobody's using it. We go and we talk to the division that purchased it, and they were like, we just haven't had time to train them. Okay, I'm going to drop everything and I'm going to get those people trained, because that's money that's sitting there being wasted. So pressing professional development needs is crucial. And then again, what do students think? What do students want out of devices? What do students want out of software? What is it that they're doing that they can't do currently in the classroom without having something available to them? We can't be afraid to ask the students, because ultimately we're there because of our students. And so we should have our students involved somewhat in that decision-making process. We also need to be sure that as part of this overall reflection, we're taking a current state of our infrastructure. And so before making any kind of purchase, obviously there's something to be said about, device requirements. If it's some, software purchase the English department wants to buy, and it only runs on a certain device, or you have to host it yourself, and you've got no more room in your server room to host any software. It's that could be a problem. And obviously we're going to take a look at, what is the state of our infrastructure, and we're going to probably know that at the top of our heads, but that backbone is so critical to the operation of any technology department. And you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir for a lot of this, but it's continuously analyzing the impact of a purchase on the network that can make all the difference. I can tell you from personal experience that software was purchased without my knowledge that would not run in our systems, and our board had to approve $1 million in order to make it work, which was more than 4 times the value of the software to make it work in the system. This was before I got there. But that to me, that's a problem. That's why we put these procedures in place, that technology needs to be involved in the decision making when it comes to software that's purchased by anyone in the district. And that would be that, again, that was one of the first things I changed for primarily this one right here, because of our backbone. If it didn't work in my server environment, if it didn't work in my data center, I did not allow its purchase, because it is always more costly to make something work than to find something that will work in my environment. Spending little bits of money now to improve the environment can pay off in the long run, because you're not ending up having to spend lots and lots of dollars to make one piece of software work or one type of device work, because you know, you needed some particular, you know, special cloud-based equipment in order to make it work. So that analysis, that backbone is critical. Vendors are in it to make the money, and I say that very jokingly. You know, the vendor bottom line is important. You know, that's, you know, nothing in life should be free, and anything that we value, we should pay for. And you know, there's this constant battle in education about, you know, well, I should just get this service that someone provides to me for free because I'm a teacher. Yeah, but free isn't sustainable. We know that. And as technology directors, we know that. We know we're going to have to make an investment, but we also know that vendors, that they're, you know, it's a business and they need to make some money too. But, you know, and again, I say this very loosely, but we have to know when to walk away from a deal. Do not be afraid. When you go out and you're looking for software or you're looking for hardware, you are in the driver's seat, especially if you work in a public school and you deal with public or state or federal funds. You are in the driver's seat. You do not have to bend your will to some shady vendor who says, well, you know, we're the best one out there. We have the best deal. You're never going to find it better than me. I will tell you this from personal experience. The company that we purchased devices from, when I told them I was not going one-to-one, they told me I was going to spend more money buying fewer devices. I was going to be buying, you know, yeah, I was going to be buying half as many devices, but I was buying different types of devices. And so I told them I would find another vendor who would be glad to take my money to provide me devices. And was not afraid to walk away from a vendor we had used for a number of years. You have to stick to your guns and make sure that you're protecting your interest of your dollars. You know, the RFP system is great. You know, depending on each state in the U.S. has different rules on how RFPs have to be run. That's a great process because you know, you can bid out and really find out what it's worth and what the cost is, and then doing a best and final offer too to see, you know, this is the price. But sometimes, you know, the lowest price isn't always the best, and you can get burned. But doing your homework and not being afraid to say no and sticking to your budget and asking for better deals. Again, this is not probably anything new, but you can do the same thing on the software side. You know, is it that you're being charged, you know, an annual license fee, and you're being charged all these different fees, and oh, you got your per student cost on top of that? Or are all of those things just ways for a vendor to slide in some extra line items to complete a quota? So be very skeptical and ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid to walk away from a deal. Next is protecting data, and you know, this is becoming more and more commonplace. I'm seeing more and more local districts. There's several states that have passed statutes that require districts to protect data. Minnesota, Massachusetts, Colorado, Texas, California. Many states have state laws now that are directing their local districts, when they make a purchase, they're having to get commits from anybody that they're working with that deals with any type of transfer of student information or other information. How they need to know from the provider of that service how that information is going to be protected. We call that information PII, personally identifiable information. And there is a lot of it out there on students. And if you have any experience with student data, you know that there is a lot of information attached to a student, not just their demographic data, their phone number, their address, who their mom and dad is. There's a lot of assessment data, there's attendance data, there's their college and career readiness scores, CTE scores. There's so many different things that are attached to students now that, if that fell into the wrong hands, could be made commercially available or could be taken advantage of. And so we have a duty as educators to protect student information. It is ultimately our responsibility to ask lots of questions about data. There are a lot of systems out there. There's one in particular, and I won't name any names, but there are systems that provide certain services to districts that say, hey, just send us all of your entire student information system. But when you really dig into, all the data on all the students, but when you really dig into what they actually need in order to run the service, it's just the student ID number and their school name, what school they attend and what grade they're in, because they just need that identifier and what grade to deliver content to and what school they're at. That's really all they need. You need to be very skeptical of those programs or ask lots of questions and say, how much data do you really need what is the bare minimum amount of data you need in order for your system to work? And then what is the advantages of providing you these additional fields of data to make the system work? Is it just for reporting? Is it for your own internal reporting? Asking a lot of questions about data and really looking at how data is sent. Flat files is still a very traditional way in order of sending data, either across SFTP or SQL connections, but really looking at more secure connections like APIs, or looking at hooks into Azure or Google Apps for Ed, looking at a better way to sync data rather than sending flat files or direct connections to student information systems. This also applies to staff as well, protecting staff data. Again, we have an equal due diligence there as well. There's one thing that you can do in order to make sure that who you're working with is doing all that they can to protect data. If you're not aware, there's an industry group called SIIA, the Software Information Industry Association, and they are an advocacy group for those vendors in the EdTech space. And the SIIA created what they call the Student Privacy Pledge, the Student Data Privacy Pledge. And it would be a good idea to go in and look to see if the companies and vendors that you do business with, that you send student data to, are signatories on this pledge. And what the pledge basically says is, this is, as a company, these are the things that we won't do with student data, and these are the things we will do. So we won't sell this data. We won't provide it to a third party without the written confirmation of the district. We won't do all these things that are really, really bad with student data. And these are all the things we will do. We'll protect it. We'll make sure that only those who need to have access to it have access to it. All of those things. So really doing your homework if you're entering into a new agreement with especially a software provider, looking at the Student Data Privacy Pledge and looking and see, are they a signatory? And if they're not, asking them why. Maybe that vendor doesn't know, or maybe they have other reasons. But again, just because they're on this list, it's a good place to start, doesn't mean that you can't go ahead and have your own data privacy agreements. And I would check with your school attorneys or your district attorneys, or at the state level. Again, many states are requiring these. I'm seeing them a lot in Colorado and Texas and California, these individual district agreements of how a particular provider is going to protect student information. So, asking lots of questions about data needs to be a top priority. Compatibility and interoperability. This is a big one for me. So compatibility and interoperability. There's this, there's been this long-standing debate of, oh, we're an Apple district, we're a Microsoft district, we're a Google Apps for Ed district. And that was all well and good when those systems didn't talk to each other. And that was really before we had this thing called the cloud that allowed systems to talk to each other. We really need to be very cautious about throwing all of our eggs into one basket. The notion that we need to be all Google or all Microsoft or all Apple, in terms of our hardware or our backbone systems, or whatever productivity devices we provide to our students and our staff, we need to be very careful as to those types of decisions. Obviously compatibility, when making any purchase, compatibility with a current system must be a consideration. It must be a top consideration. Again, we've already established why, but students need exposure to similar systems that work in similar ways. And so the example I use is Google versus Microsoft. Essentially those two products do the same exact thing. Google Docs and Microsoft Word Online, well, if you were to talk to somebody who worked at Google or somebody who worked at Microsoft, they would tell you, well, these are the differences. That's fine, that's all well and good, but we can't just pigeonhole students into one system or another anymore, because the real world doesn't work that way. And, I may personally like to use Microsoft Office products, but if I go into work somewhere and they're all Google, I need to know how to navigate that environment. I don't need to know how to specifically use this one type of tool. I need to be equipped with an understanding of how do I navigate those spaces. And so it does our students a disservice when we lock them into one particular type of system, or especially one type of device. If we look at the ISTE standards are all about choice, having students make appropriate choices when it comes to the type of technology that they use. Well, how are we going to provide them the ability to choose if we've locked them into a Google Apps for Ed environment, and they're only using Chromebooks? Well, that decision was made because Google was free and Chromebooks are cheap. Well, you know what? Microsoft Office, my O365 is free for schools too. And the devices that you can purchase that have Microsoft licenses not only can be as inexpensive if you find the right deal, but also can come with other licenses that give you the ability for students to download full versions of those. So you're not locked into this walled garden if you're making the best decision. I can use Google on any device. I can use Microsoft on any device. I'm on a Mac right now. I use both of these things because I've got, and I'm trying to teach my children, my daughters, how this interoperability works and how they can move from their iPad to their tablet to their to whatever system, because they have those skills. Don't lock yourself into a particular system because you may find yourself in a compatibility vacuum. Ask people who went full force into iPads. iPad is a great device. I own one. It's sitting in my bag right now. What do I do on it? I watch Netflix and I play games on it. For me, it's not a productivity device. For other people, that's all that they use. Awesome, because they have the choice to do that. We don't allow our students to do that. And what has happened is we're finding more and more the incompatibility with certain systems because we've locked ourselves into, well, if it doesn't work on a Chromebook, we can't use it. If it doesn't work on this Apple device, we can't use it. So we have to make sure that we're looking at more interoperability and the ability to have more interoperability with our systems, rather than saying, and being loud and proud that we're one system all the way. It does make for a support and implementation challenge, but in the long run, you're going to provide students a better environment in order for them to achieve instructional goals, because they're going to be equipped with skills rather than pigeonholed into one type of device or one type of system. Research, and this is another one that really bugs me is, I have principals who come to me all the time that say, well, Stephen, so-and-so called me about this piece of software that they have, and they sent over some research that they have, and it really shows that test scores went up, or, if we purchase this this software that, pre-assesses students, and then we put students on it for 20 minutes a day. Those students are going to grow, and they've got data and research to back that up. Those words, data and research, have become almost interchangeable, and we've got to really be cautious when that's the case, because data is different from research, and research is different from data. But there are a lot of companies that are out there that say, hey, look at our research about how students grow and students do this. We have to be very careful about where is that research coming from. There's an example I use about a company who says, they have some software that when students use it consistently, those students on these state assessments will grow X number of points, or have shown to grow this number of points. And it makes a really good sales pitch to go into a principal or go into a district and say, all you got to do is purchase this, put your students on it. There's nothing the teacher has to do. The software takes care of everything for you, and your students will grow. In fact, my child's school was one of these. My daughter's school was one of these. And the students didn't grow at the end of the year. And the principal asked me, they said, well, how can they have research that shows this? Because when we dig in and we look at their research was performed internally. It was not independently handled. It was not done by a third party. We have to look at what is being said with a critical eye. Where does the data come from? Now, data is one thing. Hey, we have X number of users, and according to our user surveys, they're very, very happy. That's one thing. But throwing around that research word and saying, if you do this, this thing will happen, and here's the data to back that up, we have to be very skeptical about that, especially when it comes to a piece of software. One of the most famous cases was with Bob Marzano and a particular company that produces front of classroom interactive whiteboards. That research was paid for by the company. And of course, Marzano said that it was going to be, that it was going to improve, instruction. When it was tested by an independent party, it really didn't. So, we have to be very skeptical about those things. And if products are truly backed by research, there should be some independent research to back that up to ensure that that is really the case. So asking lots of questions about that data and that research is critical. Coming towards the end here, the true cost of ownership. Really investigating what is it going to cost for us, in the long run. If a piece of software, obviously reoccurring licenses, is it based on student headcount? Is it based on, just some annual fee? Is that fee going to, is it going to go up over time? Because this helps you budget long term. Obviously, most school budgets are due January, February, so we're having to look. Obviously at this point of the year, I was finalizing my budgets to take to my board for approval, so I needed to know what it was that my reoccurring costs were going to be. But there's some deeper costs that come in there. One of the things that is starting to happen more and more is some software providers are giving a lot of stuff up front and then taking a lot of it away because they're realizing that they didn't charge enough in the beginning. One of the better examples of this is another one of those front of classroom interactive whiteboard display makers who gave their software away for free forever, and then up and decided, oh, we're going to start charging you for updates for that software. And that came as a true surprise, because the true cost of ownership was I buy the board, I get updates for that board. But what about the teacher device that has the software on it so they can plan at home? Well, because it was free, we could just download it there. But now I've got to get charged for that license. So that was a cost we did not anticipate because it was just sprung on us. And so asking lots of questions, now that's something that's really hard to plan for. But asking the question about, well, what about updates? Are we going to have to pay for updates? How does that work? Are you going to give it to us for free? Or are we going to get a bill for that? Or are we just not going to have the latest and greatest version because we don't buy the updates? You don't want to spend that chunk of your budget on some software to only find out you're going to have to pay for the next version. So, there's a lot of those hidden costs of ownership that need to be decided up front. in order to really decide, is this the bottom line or isn't it? What is the true cost of support? This is another area where you can get caught off guard because support is expensive. And if you're talking about, a piece of software, who's going to support? Because people are going to they're going to get locked out. They're going to have some problem. If it's a device that's going to need to be repaired, if it's software, somebody's going to need to know how to do something, or they're going to forget how to do something. And so what is that true cost of support? Asking lots of questions. Do you have to pay for support? Is it a particular line item? Don't get caught up when, you've got some great piece of software and then they say, oh, well, in order for you to get support, you've got to buy a support contract for us. That happened to me. And one of the products we used in our district, if we wanted support, we were going to have to start paying for it. How much if you do pay for support, that, and that shouldn't be a deterrent. You get what you pay for. And so don't let paying for support be a deterrent, but asking the question, well, if I have to pay for support, is it unlimited? Do I get only a certain number of support cases a year? Is it only certain people who can call, or is it anybody who can call? Is that support available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, or is it business hours? What methods do you have to support? So if I've got a product that's used by teachers, I would want the teachers to be able to go directly to the vendor. I don't want them to have to call my help desk. My help desk is there to help people if they're locked out of their email or they're not able to do something on their mobile device. It shouldn't be to support, to support some product that I don't know all the ins and outs and inner workings of. That teacher should be able to call that provider and say, hey, I need some help with this. And, they should be able to do it on that teacher's schedule. But asking that question up front, is that support local or is it outsourced? Outsourced meaning, is there after hours support? If you've got some mission critical system, like a notification system that sends emergency mass messaging, you want to know that when you have a problem in the middle of the night, when you call, you're going to get someone on the phone. You're going to get an answer. It's not going to be answered by an answering system that's just going to take your name and number and try to get somebody for you. You're going to want to talk directly to someone. So asking a lot of questions about support and how that's done, again, up front, and that should be with all the hardware and all the software, and really getting it to the heart of what support you're going to get. And then the last area is developing professionally, and I call this developing professionally because that's what we're doing, is we're developing as professionals. We're not professionally developing. And that's, when we purchase any kind of software or hardware, there's eventually going to be some training that goes along with it, and that's going to be needed to go. And so again, that needs to be a critical part of the conversation. How are we going to train everybody? Is it going to come at a cost? Is it going to be included? Is it going to be, a train the trainer model? Is it going to be virtual? Is it going to be in person? Asking those questions up front, not after the contract is signed, not after the RFP is issued, asking before any of that is done, so that you know what you're getting into. Because again, the first thing in the first area in the reflective questions, we're taking a state of our people. Well, if we're having to do training and I've only got 3 people and I've got to train 900 to 1,000 people, that's going to take me a while. And so I need to know what kind of support am I going to get from the provider in order to get everybody trained. What about new user training? So we're going to set up this new user training at the beginning of the year. What about in January when I do new hires? Is that going to be included too, or am I going to be responsible for that? And again, I'm okay with it either way. I just need to know up front. Don't surprise me after we get to that point. I say, oh, by the way, I've got new users. What are we going to do? Oh, you're going to have to pay for that. Just tell me up front if that's what's going to have to happen, and I can plan for that. Is coaching provided? Long-term professional development. That's what I love about webinars like these. The providers, the software providers who are doing thought leadership like this is such a place that is lacking in the education space. That's what I love about these webinars, is that you can learn from incredible people and get to know the products that you've come to love and trust, and learn something too. And so, looking at, what kind of ongoing professional opportunities could be provided. Is there specific trainings? Is there a monthly webinar? Is there a Twitter chat that could help coach users? Depending on what the product is. Those opportunities for deeper professional development. Is there a community available for teachers or for users to be able to go into and ask questions or to learn from other users? All of those things can really make a key difference in who you decide to use as a provider for a particular piece of hardware or software. So you're just looking for more than that provider. You're looking for a partner, and that's what I used to tell my partners all the time. Anybody who I did business with, I said, look, I'm not looking for somebody just to provide me a service. I'm looking for a partner. I had weekly calls or bi-weekly calls with many of my software providers, even if I had nothing to talk about. I just wanted to touch base with someone to say, hey, this is what's going on. How are you? What's new? Is there anything I need to know? And by having those conversations, it really, we were on cutting edge on some of our stuff because we knew what was coming and could prep our folks for it. So, it really can make a difference to be plugged in that way to have a partner rather than a provider. And we can, I boiled this down into these, kind of these key takeaways. So asking lots of these reflective questions. So what are we doing? What's the value to our budget? What's the ultimately, and what should be overarching here is what's the value to our instruction? I say grill your vendors, but is this the best price? What are your training models? What are your support models? It really comes down to asking lots of questions up front. I'm not being afraid to ask those questions, and if you don't like the answers, you say you don't like the answers, and try to get better answers. But asking a lot of questions rather than just taking things at face value. And if you have a model of software purchasing that allows for more site-based, training your principals or your curriculum folks to ask these questions as well can be a huge lifesaver going forward. And then evaluating things often. Is what we're using, is it working? Not working from a technical sense, but does it help? Is it helping us solve our problem and for the reason that we purchased what we were purchasing it for? Is it helping us? What else could we be doing? Is there something now that we know that we should be doing, or is there something that we need to change? So I hope that you have taken away something that you hadn't thought of before, or some type of question. I try to make it so that it's not quite so overwhelming, but I know that there may be some lingering questions. So there's an infographic that you can grab that myself and my partner Shaylin created that has a lot of this on here. That's kind of a quick grab and go to some of the questions to ask on making the best technology purchases. And you can find that on my website at web20classroom.org/resources. I would encourage you to check that out. And then lastly, I'll leave you with, I hope that you stay in touch. Shaylin and I hope that you stay in touch, and check out our website. We have more free learning resources. Grab you can check out our self-paced virtual learning, or you can partner with us, and we hope that you check that out. So I'll leave you with those key takeaways, and I will see. I'll hand it all back over to y'all and see if there are any questions.
Here's a question for you. So can you give an example? You talked a lot about your relationship with vendors. And so what were some other questions that you would ask your vendors when you're talking about grilling the vendors? Say like training models, does that include on-site training?
Yeah,
or,
I ask a lot, and it goes even beyond those questions. Like, I want to know if I'm purchasing something, especially software related. I kind of dumped it into kind of those buckets of training, support, data. I want to know what happens with my data. What happens if we break up? what happens to my data? What do you do with my data if we break up? And a lot of that can be solved with having kind of a data agreement up front. And again, that's where it's good to look to the state or look to the local agency to see if there's already something that you could be using. But I would also ask about, how often are updates run? So how often are you updating your product? And I don't mean like software patches and bug patches. I know those happen all the time, but how often are you changing the product that's going to require me to update, to have to provide additional staffing to my service desk because people are calling wanting to know why this thing looks different. Am I going to have to do that once a month? Am I going to have to do that once a quarter? Is it 2 times a year? So so for me, it took a lot of trial and error. It took a lot of failing. It took a lot of having problems. And really where it started was when we stepped back and we did this analysis of this software purchase that was made. And we said, gosh, that was an utter failure because we didn't ask all these right questions. My team sat in a room and we had a whiteboard. And we said, pretend you're a vendor, pretend I'm a vendor, the vendor of that product. Ask me every question you wish you'd known up front. And then we started to categorize them. And that's where they came into these categories of training and support and data and updates and those types of things. And so it's I use that term grilled very playfully. I had wonderful relationships with my vendors, and I really did consider them partners, and that's how it should feel. It should feel like a partnership, like they want to be a partner, and so answering some of these questions shouldn't be, it should be an easy conversation to have. But if it's not, it's time to step back and say, is this the best decision we need to make right now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point as far as the vendor being your partner and not just somebody that's going to contact you for a PO, 2 months before the invoice is due. Are you seeing a shift from vendors becoming more on the partner role, or is it still, more of just a salesy role where they're looking at you as dollar signs? Yeah, straight.
Yeah, it really depends on the vendor. I think there are some vendors that do a really great job of really wanting to be hands-on and be a partner, and who are willing to forego an opportunity for an upsell to forge a relationship. There are others that the value to the bottom line is really what's important. How many people can we sign up and how much money can we make from each one? And again, I'm not saying that vendors can't be in it for the money, and I'm not saying you can't have as a district have a good relationship with a vendor who you're paying for service. And obviously we should be paying for services because that's how we get good services. But there are some who do a really great job, who are really hands-on, and those are the ones who I'm always going to come back to and say, I want to extend my business, and I'm going to go to my board and I'm going to say, hey, I know it's been this long, I should probably go to RFP, but here's all the reasons why I don't want to, because I already have an awesome existing relationship. I already know I'm getting the best price because they've been very transparent about it. And then I don't have to go through that process again. Obviously, I need to be doing my due diligence, every 5 to 7 years, but having that relationship can really open doors into, well, we've got this new thing coming out. We would love to trial it in your school. Or, they know who your teachers are. They know who your users are. They know what's happening and can really help guide you and help you make the most of that software. Because a lot of software collects dust in district, virtual dust in districts, is because there is no hands-on relationship. There is no people don't know that, I wish it could do this, and what they don't realize is it can. They're just not on the right screen in order to do that. And if there had just been a relationship with a provider, they would know that. So there are some that do that really well, but that's where it comes to, all of us being involved in the process, asking lots of questions and really feeling like, what kind of feeling do we get from having that conversation?
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Stephen. This has been wonderful. And we are at the top of the hour, but I want to remind everybody that on January 21st, we have our next session with Shaylin Farnsworth, who will be talking about ways to maximize feedback. So look into your inboxes for an invite to that coming soon. But Stephen, thank you again. And to everybody, we wish you a great holiday season and a happy new year. Thank you so much.